Hello students and welcome. Today we are going to take a trip back to World War II to take a look at the events that would change the course of the war so that the Allies would eventually win. My name is Dwayne Vance, the principal at Jerusalem Lutheran School in Morton Grove, Illinois. Thanks for coming along. After viewing today's program, you should be able to answer why the Allies' campaign in North Africa was so important, what the major turning points in the war in Europe were, and how the Allies eventually pushed the Germans out of France for good. But first, we need to understand how grave the situation was for the Allies in 1941. At this time, the Allies are just about at their breaking point. German U-boats are hammering Allied supply lines in the Atlantic. Axis forces occupied Greece and Yugoslavia and were advancing in North Africa and the Soviet Union. The Axis powers are identified here in black. A short time after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt and Churchill met in Washington, D.C. They agreed to wait on a full attack of Japan so that they may focus their efforts on turning Germany and her allies back first. These efforts were to be focused in North Africa and Europe. In 1942, the Soviet Union and China also agreed to help defeat the Axis powers. The Allies were also able to introduce new technologies in 1942 that made the outcome of the war look more hopeful. Sonar technology was added to ships, which helped locate and track German submarines. New long-range bombers also gave some protection to ships far out at sea. They were also used to strike at Germany's economic resources. Factories, military centers, and railroads became major targets. German cities also came under attack by Allied bombers. They would attack in broad daylight, which would increase their accuracy and effectiveness, but would also bring about higher casualties. Now let's turn our attention to North Africa and why an Allied victory there was so important. Since 1940, the Italians had been trying to take over the Suez Canal from the British. This was a major supply line and simply could not be lost. Since the Italians cannot get through British lines, Hitler turns to his Afrika Korps and sends them to get the job done. The Afrika Korps is led by General Erwin Rommel, who is a master of warfare and surprise attacks. In fact, he gains the nickname Desert Fox by the Allies. Rommel fights the Allies in a back-and-forth battle for about 2 years that stretches across 1,500 miles of land. In 1942, he looks ready to conquer Egypt, yet a lack of supplies and troops slow his offense. In November, British forces stop his advance towards the Suez Canal in the Battle of El Alamein. At the same time, forces led by U.S. General Dwight D. Eisenhower land west of German forces in French North Africa. He is able to turn back the German forces from the opposite side. Eventually, the Americans and British are able to trap Rommel's retreating corps and force their surrender in 1943. Now with the Germans out of North Africa, the Allies can invade Italy. In 1943, the Allies land troops on the island of Sicily. Once the island is conquered, they can now try to invade the mainland. As the Allies advance, the Italian government overthrew dictator Benito Mussolini in order to make peace. However, Hitler stepped in to save Mussolini, and German troops seriously slowed the advance of Allied forces. In January of 1944, the Allies tried to take the Germans by surprise by landing forces in Anzio behind enemy lines. They were unable to break through German defenses and were trapped for 4 months. However, other forces fought their way up the Italian peninsula and eventually joined them. Together, they would capture Rome in June of 1944. Mussolini would later be captured and killed by Italian resistance fighters. The Germans would eventually be completely driven out of Italy in May of 1945. So, let's see how much you've learned so far. Grab yourself a paper and pencil and see if you can answer these next 3 questions. Question 1. What 2 technologies made it possible for the Allies to turn the war back in their favor? A. Sonar and long-range bombers. B. Radio and radar. C. Nuclear missiles and jet aircraft. And the answer is A. Sonar and long-range bombers. Question 2. What strategic area of Egypt was a major focus of Hitler's to conquer? Was it A. the South Nile River, B. the Dead Sea, or C. the Suez Canal? And of course, the correct answer is C. the Suez Canal. Question 3. What U.S. general commanded the U.S. forces from the west of the German units while the British held the east? Was it A. Omar Bradley, B. Dwight Eisenhower, or C. Erwin Rommel? And the answer is B. Dwight Eisenhower. How'd you do on the questions? Hopefully they weren't too tough. While much of this is going on in North Africa and Italy, there is much activity happening in Europe as well. The Germans are making deep advances into the Soviet Union in 1941 and 1942. In September of 1942, a German army entered the city of Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad was very fierce, with soldiers fighting for each city block. Yet, in November, more Soviet forces arrived and surrounded the German army. In early 1943, the German troops were dangerously low on supplies and reinforcements. They were forced to surrender after losing 200,000 soldiers in fighting. A few months later, the Germans were dealt another severe blow as they were defeated by the Soviets in a large tank battle near Kursk. These two battles guaranteed that Hitler's plan for conquering the Soviet Union would fail. Axis troops had to retreat west towards Germany. As the Germans retreated, an invasion of German-occupied France was being planned and carried out. This plan would become known as Operation Overlord. General Eisenhower was put in charge of the plan and called for a massive landing on the beaches of Normandy in northwestern France. On June 6, 1944, D-Day began as hundreds of ships arrived off the French coast. The ships provided cover to the troops making their way up the beaches to higher ground. The invasion became the largest sea and land invasion in history. The Allies met fierce resistance by the Germans and suffered tremendous casualties. However, their continued determination finally landed 155,000 troops in France. Hundreds of thousands more troops would soon follow, and General Omar Bradley would lead the breakout from the beaches into France. Tank forces commanded by General George S. Patton broke through German lines in July. The liberation of France was drawing closer. French citizens began to rise up against the German occupation, and a small French force entered Paris in August. A short time later, Bradley and his troops would march into Paris, met by great celebration by the city's citizens. It's time for a little review again. Let's see what you remember from the turning points of the war in Europe. Question 4. At what battle in the Soviet Union was the first German advance finally turned back? Was it A, the Battle of Moscow, B, the Battle of Stalingrad, or C, the Battle of St. Petersburg? And your answer is B, the Battle of Stalingrad. Question 5. At what location did the D-Day invasion of France begin? Was it A, Normandy, B, Paris, or C, Marseille? The answer is A, Normandy. Question 6. U.S. troops entered Paris in August 1944 under this general's direction. Is it A, Omar Bradley, B, Dwight Eisenhower, or C, George S. Patton? And the answer is A, Omar Bradley. Did you get them all right? I'm sure you did. Finally, let's move on to how the Allies finally pushed the Germans out of France for good. After the liberation of Paris, the Allies start to push through France and Belgium on the way to Germany itself. In December of 1944, Hitler makes a desperate attempt to split the advancing armies. His goal is to recapture Antwerp, Belgium, which is a main supply port for the Allies. He launches an offensive in the Ardennes, which is a forest region defended by just a few U.S. divisions. In December, the Germans attacked in very heavy snow. Allied lines almost broke, yet fought bravely enough to stall the German advance. The U.S. suffered numerous casualties in the Battle of the Bulge, but as more troops arrived, the German offensive stalled and turned into a retreat. After this battle, Germany had lost all ability to wage offensive war. As 1945 began, the Soviets are pushing towards Germany from the east, while the United States and Britain are coming quickly from the west. Hitler's end is near. All right, I've got just 2 more questions for you. Let's see if you can handle them. Question 7. In one of his last offensive attempts, what supply port did Hitler target? Was it A, Copenhagen, Denmark, B, Antwerp, Belgium, or C, Bordeaux, France? And the answer is B, Antwerp, Belgium. Question 8. This is the final question. Which battle ended the German ability to wage offensive war? Was it A, the Battle of Alsace-Lorraine, B, the Battle of London, or C, the Battle of the Bulge? And the correct answer is C, the Battle of the Bulge. I hope you all have enjoyed our look back as to how the Allied forces turned around a desperate situation to eventually win the war in Europe. I look forward to seeing you all again next time as we explore important moments in U.S. history. I'm Dwayne Vance. So long for now.